If you're on offense and you have the ball, you're trying to create space for the ball to move through and get that ball through as fast as possible. And then when you're on defense in every sport that's invasion and attack and defend, what are you trying to do on defense? Constrict the space. Because I'm sure if Ronaldo's trying to get the ball into open spaces, what's the defense probably trying to do? Close down that space so that there isn't room for the ball to move through as easy. And I can tell you for sure, tip tapping through those ladders isn't creating space.
Mark, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited.
Yeah, always nice to have you on and just talk shop about speed training because I feel like there's so much we can always discuss. And I had an epiphany this week about speed training and who young athletes should be working with as a speed coach. And I really think that the coach kids work with should either have a track background or at least understand the mechanics of sprinting and stride rate and stride length. You'd be surprised a lot of soccer speed coaches, in quotes, like don't talk about stride rate and stride length, and they don't actually train sprinting.
Mhm.
Or the coach needs to at least be a student of track or have mentors who are track coaches, kind of like you and I do. And they have that nice blend of, okay, I can train actual sprint work, true speed, but I also understand the demands of the sport and the reactive component. And I just think that's the perfect blend because too often I see soccer players working with these fake soccer speed coaches that just get them in very bad mechanics for sprinting at top speeds. They have them going through ladders, their head is down, their posture is slouched, or they're just not going max speed. They're not reaching a full stride length or improving their stride rate. And it's just really frustrating to see that the soccer community still continues to miss the mark with speed training. So that was my epiphany this week. I think every soccer player should have some sort of track coach or someone with a track background as their speed trainer. When I was growing up, when I started doing speed strength and conditioning in middle school, my first speed coach was a former Olympic sprinter from Africa, and I learned how to sprint. We were doing 60s, 100s, 200s. We were doing all the drills, and my speed just soared. And I'm so glad I didn't have a soccer speed coach that just had me do ladder drills.
Yeah.
So that was my epiphany. I'm wondering your thoughts on that. Do you
So
agree, disagree?
it's 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 both. There's so many things to unpack in what you just said because one is not just soccer that has the problem, but it's all the sports. And you warned me, and Tony Villani warned me, and Matt Gates warned me. Moving to Florida was going to be tough because there are so many quote unquote ex athletes that are at the park thinking they know, and so the kids are going there and doing. And I thought, oh, how bad could it be? It's bad in Florida, but that problem it also stems back to you could say the same thing about strength and conditioning. How do the how do you show qualification? That's the problem because you know yeah, I don't know if it's still the mantra, but the NSCA used to kind of have this demand that high schools had this CSCS qualified. That's never going to happen because you know it. There's a lot of factors for that, but you are going to have coaches that are completely uncertified. They have no educational background necessarily formal, but are great coaches because they've, like you just said, they're self-educated, they get down into it. And then on the other spectrum, you're going to have coaches with 72 letters after their name that think that the NSCA or whatever textbook they're reading is actually how things work with teenagers, and they're going to try to, you know, do that kind of stuff and not be open-minded to the things that actually do impact teenagers. And so the whole problem with that is, how do you define, like, how can you let parents know? Because there's no certificate that makes you qualified. You know, it can make you certified, but it doesn't necessarily make you qualified. So it's such a battle to even figure that out. And then, I can tell you this 100% for sure. There are just as many track coaches that really don't have any clue about what they're doing as there are that do. Because again, at the high school level, if you walk in, you're a social studies teacher, and they say, "Hey, I'm sorry, we need a track coach. You're the track coach." You could say, "I didn't run track. It doesn't matter. We need a track coach. Here's the keys to the building." And there's your track coach. You know, Same with the weight room. I have no education, no background in the weight room, but I coach football. Here you go. There's the keys. So there's so many things to unpack there, but the problem boils down to, how do you identify that person? Unfortunately, you can say that, like, all the great stuff that we're doing out here in the garage, and I'm only training like 10 kids here, you know? They're going here and they're going there and they're going all over the place. And, I have kids drive from different states here, and they're like, "How come these kids that live across the street aren't training?" Who knows? Because the parents don't know. So they can't recognize good training from bad training. And so there's going to be this idea that, well, if that person was a great athlete, then clearly they're a great speed coach. Or if that person was a great, football player or a great basketball player, then they know how to run the weight room. And and I don't have the answer. A lot of people don't throw out a problem without, having some solutions. We've had this discussion in the National High School Strength Coach Association with every coach I know, battling back and forth. How do you make that distinction? And that's the problem. Is you've got great strength and speed coaches that have no formal training other than what they've learned. You have coaches with more formal training and PhDs and all this other stuff that don't have the practical adaptation stuff to do a good job. And then you've got everything in the middle. And I think until parents are able to somehow differentiate, there's always going to be that problem. And the qualifications are going to come down to, well, they win a bunch of games, so that must mean, they're doing something right, which that drives me crazy. Yeah, they are doing something right. It might not be strength conditioning and speed. Maybe they just have, better coaches or better players. But again, I'm kind of rambling on it, but I just don't, I agree with you. Like, every athlete should have a qualified performance coach. The problem is how you define that, you know?
Yeah, it's when you put it that way, it is very hard from a parent's perspective to really discern like who's the best person to work with for speed training. But I think a tip would be for parents to look at someone's body of work, whether they're posting videos online or on YouTube or talking about it on podcasts, and ask yourselves, does this make sense for the sport that my kid plays? And with speed training, I think it's easy to discern when we really put it simply. And I made a video today for Instagram talking about how speed is really just getting from point A to point B as fast as possible. So if for soccer, for example, you're sprinting onto a counter attack, or you're sprinting onto a through ball, or you're getting past a defender going to goal. That's getting from point A to point B as fast as possible. You're running an all out sprint. So, does it make sense to always have your child tippity tapping through ladders or agility rings? Is that done in the game? And I think when parents just break it down that way, like, does this make sense? Does it look like a duck, walk like a duck, talk like a duck?
And
That can
you know,
help. But I think, like, to us, the speed training's common sense. But I
yes, that's
think
what I was going to
people,
say. I was going to say I'm not
yeah.
disagreeing with you, but just to play devil's advocate, and we get offended when someone that works at a bank or works with the power company or and has no coaching background tries to say that was a terrible call, or like, what do because we have experience and information and things that go into our decisions, and it may have been wrong and it might not have worked out, but we have a process of running those decisions through that is based in professional experience, and they do not. And I think that's the same thing with speed training.
Mhm.
The local legend is always going to catch the parent's eye. You know what I mean? Like the person that, oh my gosh, this guy, man, he was great in high school. And I had a kid tell me, oh, it's been years and years. I was at York, and he said, I don't like to come to the football workouts because they're not hard enough. And I was like, really? I said, where are you working on? He said, we got I can't remember what the guy's name was. I wouldn't call it out anyway, but he was like probably a great guy. I never met him, but he said, yeah, he was the champion boxer and state champion wrestler and really good at football. And he trains us down. And he said I get harder work in our warm up. He said we run like 2 miles in our warm up, and I feel like I've worked harder. And I in my mind I was like, anything after we run 2 miles in our warm up, just I'm hearing Charlie Brown teacher, because that you just told me that the dude you're going to has no clue how to train you, you know.
Mhm.
But he carries clout because of all the things he was able to do athletically. And I think that is my biggest like pet peeve is people just believe, well, this person did this. So, obviously they know. Um, I was listening to a podcast not too long ago, and I've actually talked to him once. He's a great guy. Adam Archuleta.
Mhm.
Like, so I was listening to him on a podcast with Dan Fichter, and I can't remember, maybe it was Tony Holler. And, he was talking about how he fully admits that he doesn't know anything other than what he learned, from his training. And so that's why he asks a lot of questions, and he has to, because he wants to expand that knowledge on that. You know, Adam, if you just went by their results of, that was one of the greatest combine, you know, performance in the history. Like Adam Archuleta should be able just to rest on his glories, but he doesn't. He tries to, because he's coaching his son's team. That was on the podcast. He was talking about it, and he's always chasing, trying to be better. And the problem is, a lot of people would just say, "Well, I'm Adam Archuleta, so everybody, I don't need to learn anything. I'm just going to do, what I always did." And that's kind of the problem with most of our training. The it just has been the role of the sport coach in most instances for so long that people just do what they did, and they don't think about maybe there's different ways. And parents, you know, aren't strength coaches, and they're not speed coaches, and they're not, so the ones that are can recognize that very, very quickly, you know.
Mhm.
But the average one, it's really a conundrum, Eric. I mean, I don't know if it gets any better.
It does. It
I,
does.
I hope it is. I mean, I think we just got to keep educating and educating. And there's always going to be a group that just doesn't get it, you know. And and but hopefully, we just keep talking and talking and talking,
Yeah.
and it will offend some people because you can see on social media how offensive it gets, to the point where One of my big pieces of advice when we were talking about the some things here in Florida was uh, we need to show football coaches specifically that strength coaches aren't trying to talk down to them on their training. And because I think on social media a lot you get this strength coach versus sport coach thing, and it does come down. The reality is I don't coach football, so I'm not going to try to tell you what you should do as an expert in the sport.
Yeah.
And you are not really a professional in the performance space. So I would expect that you don't tell me what's best to train the athlete, but that's not the reality of it, because when you say it like that, you just built a wall that's going to be hard to break down. So I think it's a fine line, but we need to find a way to bring coaches into the right way of doing things without having to um, insult, because I think that is a big problem that's holding things back. Is you just got people that are like, oh, the strength. I had a guy, you're not going to believe this. I had a football coach, very good football coach, winning coach in a southeastern state, call me up to ask about some timing system stuff with Simply Faster. And he said, I know that's what you do for a job. He said, but I think the quickest way to get fired as a football coach is to let someone else do your speed and strength training. And I said, I think you're hiring the wrong speed and strength guy then, coach, because I'm not going to lie, I probably know more about it than you do. And I said, just like you know a lot more about football than I do. I said, so you need to find somebody that knows more than you and hire them, and then you won't feel that way. And he was kind of like, so there's, it's just, I don't know, it's a conundrum for sure.
Yeah. I think you're right, though, just continuing to educate both
We
the
can do it.
parents and coaches and just break it down just very simply in language they can understand. We don't need to get all biomechanical with people unless they want to. Some parents appreciate the science and they want to learn about it. I've had a few people like that, which is awesome. A lot of parents of the girls I train listen to this podcast and they get it. They understand it, and they're actually grateful that they stumbled upon the channel because they're like, you guys are on here talking about things we've never heard before. And I'm just really excited about that. And it just kind of reminds me, you're going to get the people that you're going to get, but you can't win everyone. All you can do is just educate the best you can, impact the parents and athletes the best you can. And I don't know if you found this too, but I like to explain speed to my girls also. And I don't like them to just show up and do the drill. I'll explain why we're timing, why we warm up with plyometrics for
Mhm.
6 seconds or less, why we do certain drills that we do on our speed days, why we do repeat sprints for conditioning, and why we don't do long distance runs. And when I explain it to the girls, they get it
Yeah,
and they're bought in, and then they get in the car and they explain it to their parents, and then it's just this ripple effect and everyone's excited about true speed training. And then you also see these girls who do show up for these speed sessions, they start to surpass other girls on their team who aren't doing appropriate speed training. And that's
100%.
what
Yeah.
I want. And I don't know if you've seen that, but I have girls flying on their teams. They're in the top in miles per hour, and there's people looking around like, what are you doing? So I think
But
if you
I,
can do that too and have that ripple effect, that's powerful. Even if you're working with just a handful of athletes, if one girl can share, hey, I'm actually like doing it this way because this is how speed is trained, then that's powerful.
well, when I started, I had not really done any private training until I joined Ernest there at Fit Method, and we combined our treadmills, stuff like that. I said, I'm not sure how many kids, like I'm going to get, because I was in a different part of town than where I lived. And he said, um, we're going to get you 4 or 5 athletes. And then in 2 weeks, you're going to make them so much better that their teammates are going to start, their parents are going to start saying, And I was like, I hope so. And within 2 months, I had more athletes, and a lot of them were girls soccer players because you can make such an impact instantly on girls soccer players just because if they've been not training optimally, just a little bit of optimal training is, and let's just be honest, and you know, female athletes listen in a more in a faster and more intense way. So you can impact them almost instantly because there's not a lot of that ego. And I say that because there's a lot of ego in the teenage male that's like, oh, this is what I saw so and so do. And so you grab those girls soccer players, those girls even volleyball players, and then next thing you know, within a week or two, they're doing things that hadn't been done, and parents are like, "Whoa, what are they doing?" And they're like, "Well, we're good." And like Coach Ernest, he has so many. He can't even take all the people that. I mean, I think he has like 40 plus ECNL soccer players that he trains now, and he started with one or two, and they would just go out to practice, and the parents would be like, because when they get to that high of a level, they understand training a little bit better. But you know, it goes back to, and I know I told you the story before, but when my daughter was playing, I think her last year of club soccer, she switched clubs, and I told the coach, hey, she said, hey, if any parents have anything they can help us with, so I went up and I said, hey, this is what I do if you want me to do warm ups, and she said, yeah, sure, please do that. And I did a couple days of it. On the third day, she came up and she said, coach, she said, um, I don't need you to teach them anything. I just need you to get them warmed up. Like you're doing a little bit too much coaching in the warm up. And I was like, well, I think you should handle it then. Because like I'm not gonna not teach the athletes. Like if they're doing something that I see, you know, there's a switch, a boom boom, and they're not locking, if they're not locked and they're not popping lock and they got that soft knee, well, that's not right. Like that's not the right way to do it. So I'm gonna stop them and say, pause, this is what we need. Pause, this is what we need. And she didn't want me to do that, when if she could have just let me roll with it for a couple of weeks, then everything would have been fine. And she really was just like, no, we don't have time for that. And I need him to get through these set exercises. So I just stepped back, and the girls were they didn't complain to the coach, but my daughter was like, everybody was like, where's Coach Mark? Our warm-ups are so much better when Coach Mark's out here. And
because it's productive.
yes,
They're
and they know
they're
that. They
learning something. I
know.
think that's the culture with, at
Mhm.
least with soccer and some other sports, but the culture is, okay, everyone, just, do the warm up, go through the motions. And it's like, no, that is 10 minutes, which is a lot of time
A
that
lot of
you,
time.
yeah, you
That's
can
so
develop their
about that.
speed in. And actually the club we're doing the speed clinic for next month. So they do the good old jog 5 laps around the field as warm up. So
Really?
yes, I didn't tell you this, but we are going into a different territory, but I'm excited because I I'm going to predict the girls are going to love the speed warm up more than the jog 5 laps around the
And
field. I can guarantee you that. And I'm really excited to change their mind and help the coaches have faster players. I think
yeah,
like if we're just jogging
will
around
they
the
let
field
us?
and goofing off,
Yeah.
we're not getting better.
Are they going to let us, talk to the coaches? Because I know he said he was trying to do and this is probably a conversation we need to have off of this, but if we can, I would really like to sit down with the coaches and explain our methodologies. But anyway,
And we can do it as we go. I think there's going to be a couple of coaches there from those teams. So as we do it, we can, like when we're talking to the girls, we can just explain, here's what a pogo hop is, here's the form, and then get into it. I think it's like
I
a
think
training session, but an education session at the same time.
when Michaela decided that she wanted to do club soccer, maybe my daughter, eighth or ninth grade, um, we went to several different like club workouts or whatever. And how I picked the club, like she picked it, but this is the one that I was like, this is the club. There was a coach there, and he's still in Charlotte. I think he's over the whole boys program for independence now there in Charlotte, but his name's Pat White. Fantastic coach. I always wait and see how they're gonna warm up, and if it's the coach that says, "All right, girls, go warm up," and then they sit and look at their phone or talk, I didn't want any part of that coach for my daughter.
Yeah.
I didn't want any part of that coach. I wanted the coach that was coaching the warm ups because that coach gets it in the fact that, I mean, I can't remember 4 or 5 practice. We were, I mean, they practiced like 4 times a week, right? If I remember right. That's 40 minutes a week. That's 40 minutes. That's a class period in a 8 period day, that you're missing out on making your athletes better. If all you're doing is letting the I'm sorry, but if you're letting your athletes completely run the warm up, half your girls aren't doing anything. Half your girls aren't doing anything because uh, you know, even the highest level girls, you watch that and they still don't. They're still going to do their own thing if you don't coach it.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy. Like the I when I see coaches having kids run laps, my first thought is how lazy. Like that's the best you could do was run laps. And I know this because I taught PE for so long before I actually was able to just be in the weight room the last like 12 or 13 years of my career. And I know there's just some days when you're like, I can't handle one more second of these 45 ninth graders. So, all right, warm up today is we're timing the mile, take off. That gives you like 15 or 20 minutes to just veg, you know? And that's lazy. That's lazy, and I'll admit it. And probably 75% of the PE teachers in America know exactly what I'm talking about because sometimes you're just like, I'm not trying to be lazy, I'm just done, like and and but that's my thought is let's go. Like coach your kids. Coach your kids.
It's a lot of time in a warm up, and I don't even like calling it the warm up anymore. I just wanna call it the workout because we as soon as the session starts, we're getting right into our plyometrics, our mechanics
Yeah.
drills, our
You know,
accelerations. We're
yeah, do you
it
know
is
Gary
warming
Schofield?
them up because 'cause they're moving, but I rarely stretch anymore. We'll do some dynamic stretching, but it's definitely not the focus in the start of the session.
How well do you know Gary Schofield? You know him well?
I don't.
Okay, so he's one of the original founders of the National High School Strength Coach Association. Well,
Oh,
he was
okay.
speaking. I was at a conference in Rhode Island. I was up there with Tony Vellani, and Gary Schofield was talking, and he said that exact same thing. He said we switched the name of it from warm up to uh, performance period or performance whatever. And he said we didn't change any of the exercises. We just changed the name. Like 2 or 3 days in, he said a couple of the kids came up to him and said, "Man, I'm glad we don't do those warm ups anymore. These performance circuits are just awesome." And he was like, I mean, it's
That's
it
crazy.
there's this Adam Fight, Dr. Adam Fight was up talking about this up there from Springfield College, and he was talking psychology, but he was talking about how the words matter. Words matter in like one thing, and this is football related, but I immediately came back and changed this because I never really thought about it. Um, the football coaches are run sprints based on positional sizes, and they'll say bigs, mids, skills. And he's like, the bigs are pretty skilled too, just so he said, how about calling them fast, faster, and fastest? And he
Mhm.
said, because words matter. And when you say, hey, fast guys up, and the big, they're gonna, and I said, you know what? That's something, I mean, I'm stealing that. I'm stealing that
Yeah,
because
I like that.
things like that matter. So when you throw the word performance in, speed, like, well, just look at this. You just talked about it, speed ladders. Now, I can tell you that I am not as anti speed ladder anymore as I used to be because I've seen how Tony Vellani uses them to speed up their feet so that they can learn how to come out, slow down, and get in better positions. And there's
Mhm.
things. So I actually had somebody call me the other day about the ladder, and they were complaining because a good friend, someone that you would know too, um, was using the ladders now because he was doing some of Tony Villani's footwork stuff. He said, I can't believe he's using the ladders. And I said, listen, I said, a ladder is a tool. You know, the ladder didn't decide to be called the speed ladder, right? People call it the speed ladder.
I think
And
that's my problem with it.
yeah, and it's
That
not,
yeah, that's
and
my
here's the
problem
thing,
with it.
if you use the ladder for good, it's going to be a good tool. And if you are teaching your kids, this is how we want to be fast, well, it's not the ladder's fault. And this was the exact analogy. And Tony used this, Tony Villani used this in his talk the other day. If I take a screwdriver and try to hammer a nail, is it the screwdriver's fault or am I a moron? Right.
Mhm.
So it's the people that really truly believe we're going to throw that ladder down and we're going to do all this great footwork. And this is what's making us better at sports. Those are the people that need to be ridiculed about it because there are good uses for a ladder, to set up footwork, to extend your strides. If you wanted to say, hey, we're going to go almost use them like wickets a little bit.
Yeah, the Wicked
But,
style is good.
but the way that they get portrayed by people that are just using the tool incorrectly. I mean, imagine if, like I said, people were posting videos themselves hammering nails with a screwdriver, and everybody was like, "What a great thing! That's awesome!" Like every carpenter and tradesman in the world would be like, "What are these idiots doing?" Well, we're the tradesmen, so we're looking at people misusing that tool and saying, "Oof, like that tool is terrible." When in reality, it's not the tool that's terrible; it's the craftsman.
Mhm.
So I'm not as against it. I don't really use it. Um, I use cones or hashes to do the in and out footwork stuff that we do as far as setting up. Now, this isn't linear speed, setting up game speed, teaching separation, teaching foot placement, um, into cuts and out of cuts and things like that. I don't use a ladder just because ladders drive me crazy. They're unfolding them. They're all, just like, oh,
Yeah.
no. So
Yeah,
I
I
just slow
agree.
down cones. You can do the same thing with cones, or that's what Tony was giving his talk today and or on Saturday, and he said that so many people were giving him a hard time about ladders in his videos that he just shot the same exact drills. He just used cones. Everybody was like, "Great, these are great drills." So, but
That's hilarious. So he's
yeah,
using it more for, I guess, deceleration, quick steps.
yeah,
Okay, interesting.
yeah.
Yeah,
And,
that I mean, I can understand that. Yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on your population or just
mhm,
who you're working with. But I don't know. I think my problem with ladders is sometimes I feel athletes get into bad habits of always looking down, and I
yeah,
don't want them looking down. I want their head or eyes forward or on a swivel just because it translates better to the chaos in their sport.
yeah.
So, I don't know. I think it's just
But
every
I think
coach
you
is
can coach that.
different.
I think you can coach that. Like, that was a bad rep. You look down. Go back and do it
Yeah.
again. Don't look down. But I think really the problem that everybody has, honestly, is that people believe that that's making that the quick foot stuff that you
Mhm.
see is making kids better, and
Mm.
people that actually know better are are just like it makes them angry. So we turn our anger not just to the coach, but the tool that they're using. And because you could say that about dropping their head, just about anything. It would just be. Um, I just feel like it just depends on. It is all like an it depends. I know people are like, if you say it depends, it's not a good answer. I just don't believe that at all because there's just too many times when someone says something and you say, yeah, it depends. It totally depends on
Mhm.
whatever factors. But I do think that they need to stop calling them speed ladders because
Yes, that's the
like
big problem
if
is
I
they're
oh
not
my
getting
gosh, like
you faster.
so
Yeah.
and that that is something that everywhere I've been, I've had to, fight it out with athletes because they've always been taught, this. Well, did you see that video of the backup tight end for the San Diego Chargers the other day that was
No.
around social media? He was dancing and people were
I've
like,
seen videos similar to that,
people were
yeah.
like, man, he's gonna be wide open, like and someone got on there and was like, his feet moved and the center of mass never moved. Like his feet were moving and he never moved, right?
Yeah, yeah. Again,
So
point A to point B is the
yes,
athlete
like it's
moving as an
point A to
entity.
point B, create separation. And, you know, I think that I don't know. And again, just there may be a place in a certain positional spot in football where an extra step to get somebody out of your face might be useful. But I mean, not really in soccer,
Mhm.
So I mean, it's just uh, not really in basketball, you know? And in football, I mean, isn't that just really comes down to that little that they do is really only used in one part if the defender is right in front of you and you're trying to get him off a line, then you do that. But how many times does that happen? Not very often. So they're spending all this time on these like crazy releases and and that and instead of just creating like, hey, get my foot in the ground, create separation, and get open. You know, it's soccer. I'm sure would be a similar analogy. I tell our guys, and they're starting to believe me. They really are. They're starting to believe me. I tell our guys, our football guys, you're plus one before the snap steps. You're a step ahead of the defense pre-snap because you know where you're going. So the only thing you have to do to make sure you're not covered, don't give away your plus one. And how do you give away your plus one? The first time your feet move and you don't.
Yeah.
You just gave away the plus one. So now you're maybe even, or maybe the defender now has an advantage. Part of soccer is put the ball in the open space, you know, and get to the open space as fast as you can. And then get the ball to the next open space and get there as fast as you can. And I thought, aren't all invasion and defense sports essentially come down to that? If you're on offense and you have the ball, you're trying to create space for the ball to move through and get that ball through as fast as possible. And then when you're on defense in every sport that's invasion and attack and defend, what are you trying to do on defense? Constrict the space. Because I'm sure if Ronaldo's trying to get the ball into open spaces, what's the defense probably trying to do? Close down that space so that there isn't room for the ball to move through as easy. And I can tell you for sure, tip tapping through those ladders isn't creating space.
Hey guys, just want to take a quick moment to shout out our sponsor, Simply Faster, and one of my favorite speed timing systems from them, the Freelap. I use it for my own sprint training as well as for my athletes, and they love it. It's super easy to set up, you can take it to the field on your own, and you can get accurate speed times to track your progress. Check the Freelap link in the caption below to start adding timing into your speed sessions. If you know me, you know I love my Freelap. If you're serious about speed, it's time to start timing.
And it's also not closing space on defense. So maybe like, and I've been guilty of it where I throw a ladder down and, say pre-practice of a football practice and say, you guys can go through the ladder as a warm up. I don't care what you do whatever you want, you know, just to kind of give them a fun station. But I don't think it's creating speed in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good discussion. And, I think we also just have to keep in mind how much time we have with our athletes. In the off season, we might have more time, but even then, I would rather do plyometric drills in place of
Mhm.
ladders, and then when we go to in season, a lot of these young girls are so busy with their practices. So if I see them once or twice a week for a speed session, I'm opting for the most bang for buck speed drills. And for
Yeah.
me, just tapping through ladders just isn't it. It doesn't move the needle for the amount of time I see my athletes. And I don't know if you agree with this, but the more I do this, the less time I get with the young athlete of today, because they're starting to add more practices to the schedule, more games, more showcases. So I don't think it's getting any better. So us speed and strength coaches have to be really intentional with the exercise selection we choose for our workouts.
100%. I think Dr. Joe Eisenman just sent me a
I
little
love
survey.
Joe.
Yes, I know. He sent me this little survey. He's thinking about doing I don't know if it's a blog post or whatever, and he's just getting people. And it was
Wait, are you contributing? Because he asked me to contribute.
yes, I did.
Yay!
So I
That's
contributed,
awesome.
and I said one of the two responses I had was as advice to parents was stop convincing yourself that more skill work at younger ages is making them better because
Mm.
at the cost of preparation, you know, whether it's, like doing anything other than, baseball and softball are so tied into that. I have baseball guys that come to me and we're trying to find now it's summer, they're in their travel ball phase 2 of travel ball, fall ball's coming up in Florida, and we're like, okay, can you do Thursday at 6? No, we've got our pitching coach Thursday at 6. What about Tuesday at 6? No, 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 we've got fielding practice. We practice, and, you know, my advice is stop. Like, you do have to be good at the skill, obviously, but if you're not building that base of athleticism, that base of strength and ability to move, and you're just building skill in there, then yeah, are you trying to have the best 12-year-old baseball player or the best 18-year-old baseball player or the one that can play baseball the longest? You know? And I think that's my was one of my like paraphrases of that contribution was like do not sacrifice uh you know those training sessions with the skill sessions as they get older, and when they're younger, don't sacrifice letting them play the other sports. Do not sacrifice letting them play their sports. Joel Smith asked me on our podcast because I told him I grew up just not able to move and just I was the weight room warrior, and when I walked on campus in college, everybody was like, "Look at this guy. He's the strongest guy," and da 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 da. And then I was a backup. I played on special teams, and everybody's like, "What's wrong with this guy?" I couldn't move. Like I spent all my life in the weight room, I couldn't move. And he said, "What would you do differently?" And I said, "We didn't even have soccer when I was growing up, but if we did, and that I would have played that at ages 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, just to learn how to move, variable movement, basketball. I had a football coach tell me one time, I had ninth grade football players in a class, and we one day a week, like it was a strength conditioning class, ninth graders. It was awesome. One day a week, we took them to the gym and we let them play basketball. We did 3-on-3 tournament every single Friday with all of them. And I had a football coach at the time come up to me and say, if you keep letting these guys play basketball every Friday, we're going to get beat when they're varsity players. And I was like, Coach, it's the exact opposite. We're going to be better at football because I let them play basketball every Friday because they're competing, they're moving, they're solving. What is sports? Sports is solving movement problems. The faster your brain can solve movement problems, the better you are at sports. Well, why can you and I'm terrible at math, but I can do 5 plus 5. And I'm sure you just, as soon as I said that, you said 10 in your head. 10 plus 10, right? 20. Why? Because we've got a million reps at those things. But if I said, what's the square root of 5,248? I don't know. But there are people that can solve that as quick as you and I just solved 10 plus 10. Why? Either they're just God gifted mathematicians, just like we have God gifted athletes that can do anything no matter what, or they've just so many reps at solving that their brain works fast. So get these athletes out into these other sports when they're young. I get it. When you're 15, 16, 17, sometimes it's just time. And I'm not a play another sport at all cost person because sometimes people just love baseball. And that's what they want to do year round. My guy that plays for UNC now, one of my favorite kids of all time, Perry Hargett. I had him at Metrolina. He would have been a Division I quarterback, a Division I point guard, or a Division I baseball player. And in about the sixth or seventh grade, probably, I don't know exactly, but he went to all baseball. And that's because that's what he loved to do, you know. While there's other guys that play three sports and they dominate. But in those younger ages, don't peg hole those kids. If they want to play, I've had parents tell me, "Ugh, my son ever came up and said he wanted to play soccer or whatever." I just be like, "Oh no," and I'm like, "Heck no!" Like 6 and 7 and 8-year-old soccer, watch them move. Like we just don't go out and play pickup sports like we used to. Like I sound like a grumpy old man when I stomp on that, but we didn't have video games. I'm 54. We didn't have video games, and literally I grew up in the latchkey kid era where, like, it's no joke. Your parents would be like, get out of the house. Don't come back until 9 o'clock tonight or when the lights come on. So we were out, whatever sport was going on during that time, we were playing wiffle ball. They just don't do that anymore. Then you combine that with kids aren't playing multiple sports, they're focusing on those sports at those young ages, and you are stripping them of so much athletic development. It's so that's kind of what I more or less I get on my soapbox about, but um, that's that's what I really think kids are lacking these days. My baseball players that come over here, I love them to death, but most of them can't run. Like they take these little like they have hard time opening up. Like they're my number one. I don't even have wickets here, like traditional wickets. But I'm trying to get these guys to open up their stride a little bit. And I had to take my hurdles and make wickets and try to, because they're in the ninth grade and they haven't played anything but baseball since they're 6 years old, you know? And what running are baseball players doing, honestly? Running poles and back and forth and short, choppy steps, as opposed to just opening up and getting it? So I'm sorry, I just rambled.
I agree with you, Mark. I think the domination of skills training within the schedule is a huge problem for our young athletes. And
Mhm.
I just I think some people it's just overkill. And I see a lot of people do it year round, the skills training on top of the insert sport here that they're already doing. And I think in season at least, you don't need to do extra skills sessions. You can just work with the ball on your own and play against a wall. Like that's sometimes better development than a skills coach or spending $100 an hour on a skills coach. And I think there's got to be seasons of leaning one way. So there's seasons where your sport should be go time, whether that's fall ball or spring. And then whether it's winter or summer, you should be leaning more towards your athletic development, your speed, your strength, your power, and just getting more variety. And I don't know if you've seen this problem even in the summer off season, but I know some girls who are still just plowing through all the soccer, all the skills training. And I'm like, it's summer. like, let's lean more this way. You're not towards speed. You're not going to lose your soccer skills. Still touch the ball from time to time. Don't be stupid. Don't take fully off from the ball in the summer, but lean more towards speed and heavy lifting and power training. And then you're going to develop physically for the season in the fall again. I think too often athletes make that mistake of doing all the skills, their sport year round, and then they wonder why. Maybe they're plateauing, or maybe they're too fatigued to get the benefit of speed training, or maybe they have an overuse or growing pains injury that hasn't subsided because they're doing all the same movements over and over again. So I'm glad you brought it up, because it's still a big problem. I think it's getting worse just in my experience with who I'm working with. And yeah, I think you just have to
Well,
have
Erica, it's
seasons.
because people make money. That's why it's getting worse.
Yeah.
Make money off of it.
Yeah.
So they convince the parents that, hey, you need to come to and coaches have buddies that are doing you know, so it's a monetary racket as much as it is anything. Um, that,
Yeah.
like I always thought and again, I'm not an expert in soccer, but I think it would be cool if when you weren't playing the full 11 on 11 soccer, that your skills training was like maybe playing inside, indoor soccer where it's a compressed field and it's going to have you more explosive movements. And then maybe another phase where then your training would be playing on a big field, but with less players. Like, I don't know, if
Mhm.
6-on-6 or, you know,
Yeah. It's
something that would,
great conditioning. It's
yeah,
great
something that
conditioning
would
too.
extend the field. We talk a lot about that in our space about how important small sided games are and how you can adjust the size of the field, the number of the players to get what you want out of the athlete from a training adaptation, and they really don't even realize that they're doing it. That's something that I think more teams and coaches could definitely take advantage of. And again, I'm just throwing out opinions. I don't really know, but as far as if that ever is even a possibility, but I would think that as opposed to just aimlessly going to a skills practice and kicking the ball between cones and like
Yeah. I
that.
agree. I had Todd Bean on the podcast a few years ago, and he is the head coach of Tovo Academy, which I think is one of the best technical and tactical soccer development academies in the world. So he does a lot of camps in Barcelona. He comes to the U.S. for a camp. I think it's in New Jersey every July or August, and he's always doing sessions for young athletes. And he said it really well. I'm trying to remember it. It was something like skill is developed the best within a an opposed environment.
Yes.
So yes, you can be unopposed, kind of juggle on your own, do wall ball, but I personally wouldn't recommend athletes do one-on-one skills training. I think it should be group, so that you know how to open up your body to make that first touch or to turn the ball away from pressure quickly. I think the skill is optimized within the context of other people being there. And like you said, in those small, tight, sided games where they're forced to keep their feet hot. So talking about quick feet, what
Mhm.
better way to get the kids' feet moving than to have them in a small space where they have to be on their toes, they have to be ready to go, and they have to always have their head up and on a swivel and aware of their environment because there's so many people in the tight space. So I think that's where skill acquisition really shines. And I'm not a huge fan of like 7-year-olds doing one-on-one skills
Yeah.
training with a skills
Yeah,
coach.
are you familiar with Sean Mishka, the movement Miyagi?
I think so. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
He talks a lot about that too. Like I think there's a place for those closed drills in the early part of things, But ultimately, and I can't remember where I saw this, but there was some research where brain activity change was much different when you're using a human cone as opposed to a cone, because now the brain perceives the threat differently and it handles the threat differently. So and again, it just comes down to the faster you solve problems on the field, the better player you are. I'm sure you've had athletes or you played with athletes that weren't your prototypical player at that position. Maybe, like for example, you talk to high school football coaches and they always talk about, man, we had this guy 20 years ago. And he was 5'9" and weighed 240, but couldn't run a 5'2". But boy, he made every play. He was unbelievable and just wasn't going to ever go to college because he didn't have the measurables. But man, he was our best player. Well, why was he the best player? I can tell you why he was the best player. He solved problems faster than anybody else did. And so maybe he was slow and short and too big, but he made plays because his brain solved things faster. So, and I'm sure, you've probably played with athletes like that. Like it doesn't make any sense that they're so good,
Mhm.
but they're so good because they either have a learned, trained, or a God gifted ability to just solve these problems fast. And so they're good at the sport because, nothing's going to make you faster than the ability to use your eyes and diagnose things on the field.
Mhm.
If you can diagnose movements and recognize things, and, much easier in like a sport, say like football, where there's set plays. So there's cues and things that if you study, than it would be in, say, soccer. But, you know, I'm sure there's still a way for an athlete to begin to recognize what the team's going to do with, with strategically and react to that in the macro, and then in the micro, be able to read what your opponent's doing and react with the ball, or quicker. That's going to make you faster, and that all just comes down to your eyes and your brain more than anything. And so I think how you learn that is you better be exposed to a million different variables, because everything's going to be different, but they'll always be similar, you know? And if it goes back to 5 plus 5 and 10 plus 10. We know it like that because we've solved those problems so many times in our life. Well, if you've solved these movement problems from age 5 or 6 because, excuse me, because you have played or drilled, you know, those situations, you've exposed yourself to those variables, the solution is going to be a lot easier and you're going to play a lot faster.
Mhm. I think that just kind of brings everything together and just coming back to how we kicked off the episode. I think with speed, there's two main parts to this that people really need to nail down. It's the absolute speed of just training to sprint fast from
Mhm.
point A to point B. So doing the right plyometrics, mechanics drills, timing your sprints, and working with someone who is actually getting you faster as an entity, not
Yes.
just quick feet.
Yes.
And so, whether that's someone with a track background or former track coach or someone who just has a very reputable body of work, just getting athletes faster, that's where you should start. And then the second component of speed is where we just ended with the brain.
Yep.
So, can you combine absolute speed with
Game speed.
reacting
Yeah.
fast? And I think you nailed it perfectly. Young kids really have to sample a lot of environments, get a lot of stimuli so that they can solve different problems quickly. I remember lacrosse helped me so much with thinking fast in soccer because it's a lot of head on a swivel. Like the entire game, hand-eye coordination. It's a little bit of a smaller field, so a little bit of a tighter space. And I remember it really translated to my quick thinking in soccer. So that variety helps. And then just with skills training, if you're doing soccer skills training, I think a group is optimal for it. A small group of even just 4 or 6, you can do 2v2s, 3v3s. I think when it gets like chaotic with a small group of people, that's when you're forced to think fast. So I think those are the two main things that a lot of athletes need to focus on to become faster and to think faster.
Yep, 100%.
Well, I know we have to plan this speed clinic for next month and figure out how to get them out of their jogging warm up. So we're going to discuss that off air, but we're really excited for it. Mark and
Yes.
I are doing this for a local club in Tampa, Florida, and we're just going to teach them the power of speed in a warm up. And we're going to do timing with the free lap timing system. We'll run them through all the plyometrics, mechanics drills, acceleration, deceleration. So it's going to be a jam packed 90 minutes. And we are always open to doing these clinics. So whether it's locally or out of state, feel free to reach out. We just love teaching speed and just helping our young athletes. So, Mark,
The one
yeah,
we
go
had in
ahead.
Charlotte, I was gonna say the soccer coach, I mean, it's one of, if not the largest high school in North Carolina, Myers Park, and he was blown out of the water,
Yeah,
just blown out of the water, and all he kept saying was, "We need to do this like once a week," like,
yeah, that's the
and
goal. Like, just change
and
people's
so,
lives from that
yep.
one speed clinic. I think, yeah, just really getting athletes and coaches excited about
Well,
speed
they
is.
don't know what they don't know
Mhm.
about it. So when you show a good coach something that's going to help them win, they're going to embrace that really fast. The people that are like, oh, we're going to keep, they're probably not the ones that are really good at their job, because the best coaches are going to figure it out and say, all right, faster players, quicker players, more wins.
Yeah. And
So
I would also argue athletes have more fun in
for
speed
sure, the
sessions.
girls
And
laugh. We were
yeah.
timing, and
Mhm.
they were competing against each other, and you know,
Yes.
Ernest and I were betting, just watching the girls warm up, who was going to be the fastest. We're just watching how they were moving and stuff. And
Yeah, yeah, we'll do that on this one. Yeah, that's always fun, but yeah, the girls love it, and I don't think I've ever had one athlete who doesn't look forward to a speed day. They all look forward to it. So I'm excited that we're doing this and just continuing to slowly impact our local community in Florida and hopefully the rest of the internet. So
yeah,
thank you, Mark, for
all
coming
righty, thank
on.
you.
And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.